simple to condemn. You have someone who's a domestic terrorist who says he has a bomb by the Library of Congress right across the street from the United States Capitol, and you have a member of Congress praising him. It's un-American, and I just wonder what Republicans would say of Democrats if Democrats were praising domestic terrorists that were calling for an insurrection against the United States government.
And just to remind people, at that January 6th rally before the assault on the Capitol, it was Congressman Brooks who told the crowd to, quote, start taking down names and kicking ass. That was his quote before that crowd did, in fact, go to the Capitol. Let's bring in professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and New York Times reporter and MSNBC national security analyst, Michael Schmidt. Good morning to you both. Eddie, let me begin with you. We can be thankful that there was no bomb in that truck, that there was no explosion, that no one was hurt yesterday. But what do you think when you hear his rant on Facebook, and then you hear a Republican congressman, who I'm sure is not alone in his sentiment, offering his support to the man?
Well, it makes concrete. Good morning, Willie. It makes concrete that the domestic terror threat is real. We know what has happened since January 6th. That the stoking of resentment among those fellow Americans who feel marginalized, who feel that they're being replaced, that it stands in some ways, Willie, on the precipice of violent reaction. And so this was a concrete example of the potential of that powder keg in some ways. But it's also the cynical nature of the politicians who tried to exploit that resentment, who tried to exploit that sense of being marginalized and alienated. So Congressman Brooks is trying to, in some ways, render, although he might say that this is a terrorist act, he still, like respond to the folks in January 6th. They describe these people as patriots at times. And so there is a debate about what constitutes patriotism here. Some of us want to describe these folk as domestic terrorists. That's what they are. Other people want to see them as patriots defending an America that's under threat. So we see here very concretely the danger that faces the nation, it seems to me, Willie.
You know, Michael Schmidt, as Eddie said, the threat from domestic terrorism is real. It remains with us. Not only that, but you have Republican members of Congress, elected Republicans, actually voicing support for somebody who says he has a bomb and says he's going to start the revolution and going to blow up the Library of Congress or Congress itself. And yet, no condemnation from Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah, this is the exact type of threat that the Department of Homeland Security and state and local law enforcement have been warning about in the past few months, since January 6th. It's this type of person. It's an aggrieved individual who wants to take, the world into their hands, wants to take the law into their hands and do something drastic. The Capitol has always been a target going many years back for individuals like this. But what we saw on January 6th was that thousands of them were willing to do this. And unfortunately, if you talk to law enforcement analysts and folks looking at this problem across the country, it's that there are many, many more of these people sitting around today willing to do this, thinking about doing this, seeing this, going onto Facebook, talking about it, and then, like this individual, broadcasting it on Facebook. So the Capitol, which always had people that were crazy from across the country that wanted to come there to do something, and at times there would be standoffs and different violence. It has just enhanced it. January 6th has made it an even bigger shrine to these individuals, and the unfortunate legacy of that day living on as an attraction for more and more people to want to go up there and to gain attention and to scare and undermine the basic fabric of our democracy.
Yeah, and Joe, yet another example, if we needed one, of the enemy from within this country fueled by Trump. And yet another example, if we needed one, of Facebook. Literally, the guy was broadcasting live on Facebook. They had to bring him down, but not after he broadcast live on Facebook. I mean, this platform is being used to fuel the most violent of the most violent rhetoric and acts that we see in live real time.
It is. I think it's fascinating. Well, first of all, that of course he chose Facebook, as so many people did leading into January the 6th. But what Michael Schmidt said, really, Eddie Glaude makes. It's just a great insight. We've always had crazy people that have always done crazy things around the United States Capitol. In fact, if these were normal times, we might do a one-sentence statement and move on to the next story. What makes 2021 different? What makes this different? What makes it different is you have a Republican member of Congress who says he understands domestic terrorism. He understands. He supports the domestic terrorism. He gets it, right? And he's one of the same people that talked about before the insurrection against the United States of America on January the 6th. And again, some people are offended when you say that. Look up sedition. Look up sedition in the federal statutes, and you will see that what happened on January the 6th lines up so neatly with that definition in the statutes. But, Eddie, you've got a member of Congress saying, I support this. You have a leader of the Republican Party that refused to condemn it. And then you have a former Republican president of the United States whose lies over years have created this sort of environment. So you have a Republican Party that sits mute while domestic terrorists plot the next overthrow of the U.S. government.
Joe, I think you're absolutely right. And if we put all of that together, one could actually conclude that there are members of the Republican Party, and we might even say the Republican Party as such, that present a clear and present danger to our democracy. One of the things that Michael Schmidt made really clear to us is that January 6th unleashed, in some ways, the crazies. It allows it to metastasize, right? But guess what? There are folks in the Republican Party who are denying the significance of the insurrection of January 6th. So at the very moment in which we saw a threat to the People's House, we've seen over these months members of Congress on the Republican side particularly, right, denying what that actual event represented. And so here we have, again, the latest instance, right, of someone threatening the Library of Congress, providing the rationale for doing so, and a member of the Republican Party engaged in craven and cynical exploitation of that resentment and that danger for their own political gains. That's where we are, it seems to me, Joe, in this moment. And we needed to say what it is. We need to describe it for what it is.
We have to describe it for what it is, and to be very clear, I've been saying it here for a couple of months, Michael Schmidt. We have three parties right now in the United States. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, and we have an insurrectionist party. And in that insurrectionist party, you have people like Ron Johnson, who said that January 6th, people coming, he had absolutely no fear of them. There was nothing untoward about what happened on January the 6th. If it had been Black Lives Matters, Ron Johnson says, well, that would have been different. I would have been nervous about that. With police brutalized with American flags, he wasn't concerned about that. You have the representative who was helping push the object in front of the door, the Capitol doors, who later said there was nothing but a bunch of tourists that were going through the Capitol that day, just another day. And then, of course, you have Donald Trump calling people who savaged police officers and beat them up with American flags, brutalize them, patriots. Called all these people patriots, which is really interesting. He goes from saying they're Antifa to suddenly saying they're all patriots, all these people carrying Trump flags and brutalizing the police. So therein lies the real problem. You can have some Republicans trying to distance themselves from these insurrectionists, from these domestic terrorists, and yet, as long as you have the leader in the House of Representatives for Republicans, afraid of his own shadow, afraid to condemn this domestic terrorism, afraid to move against members of his own caucus who say things, it seems, on a regular basis that deserve sanction, then you have at least the House Republicans who own this domestic terrorism because they won't call it out.